Hello, everybody, and welcome to Ask the CEO with Avrohom. Today, I'd like to introduce a very special guest. He's the Senior Technical Client Advisor for Lenovo. It is my pleasure to welcome Rob Kirk. Welcome, Rob.
Well, hello, and thank you for having me on your podcast today.
Thank you so much for joining. So, Rob, I'm really excited to be speaking to you today because, as you know, not a day goes by with us hearing about the dreaded data breach, whether it's a computer getting hacked or someone's laptop getting stolen. You know, it seems like CIOs and CISOs have their work cut out for them. What are some of the considerations CIOs should be having when they think about selecting their next refresh of computing endpoints without having that additional worry about data breaches?
Right. Well, I would start way before you even have the asset come into the company. So, for example, speaking of Lenovo, my own company, of course, what we do is first, all our production facilities for Lenovo commercial product, Think product, like the ThinkPads and Think Centers, ThinkStation product. They're badged Lenovo employees running it. We don't outsource that. It's a vetted, secure supply chain. We don't want, as components and subassemblies come in, we want to make sure that they're untampered with, that they're pure, if you will, that nobody could inject something into the supply chain that would be effectively a data breach or a vulnerability or a leakage of any kind, right? So those machines have to be assembled in that secure environment. And that's the first step. If I were a CEO, I'd be saying, well, I'm worried about even before I see it. What are you doing to protect me, right? So after that's sealed up, when we turn it over to a common carrier, even the packaging itself will be secured with tamper-evident packaging. So when it gets delivered either to a customer's dealer or directly to a customer, if they prefer that, they can see if something happened along the way, right? Once they open the machine, of course, that itself is a secure device. We hit the NIST parameters for BIOS, for example. Two of our machines hit some of our Microsoft's newest, highest security level, the X1 Yoga and X1 Carbon that just recently got announced for tamper resistance and firmware security. So that's right where it starts, and that's before a customer even touches the machine, images the machine. They get a product that has been vetted, secure, before it even hits them. Now, after that point, one of the key things they've got to do is, of course, make sure everything is up to date. That's probably the place where they're most vulnerable, in that you just got to make sure that everything is at the most current release level. So to aid a customer in doing that, we have a couple of things. One is a customer may have an imaging procedure that they want to do. They may want to throw away our preload and put on their own developed preload. That's fine. We give them, for example, SCCM driver packs, which would have current drivers. We give them tools to inject current drivers into their imaging process if they wish to do so. They can leverage, getting a little technical here, the SCCM third-party update catalog. We'll give them a link to that. All that is no charge, and that way they can be assured that what's flowing out from their imaging processes is current and up to date. We have standalone code that will continue to update the machine out in the field and as part of the imaging process to further reinforce the efforts to make it very, very secure and tight. And whenever we publish a security advisory, we make it open. There's a site for that. In fact, I've been talking for a while. Let me tell you a little bit about that, because if I were a chief executive officer, there's all this protection I just described. But then there's also the fact that, well, what do you do when something happens, when something hits me from left field, which can happen in the security world, right? So Lenovo is very, very public about security advisories. There's a dedicated security advisory page. When I'm talking to a customer, what I like to say is, look, we as a company hate it if we make a mistake or if there's a product that has any vulnerability. There's certainly industry vulnerabilities. That's why software gets updates, right? That's why drivers get updated. So we need to be able to tell the customer when this happens, what the product families that are affected, what they are, and what their remediation strategy is. Let's say there is a problem, right? There is an issue, and maybe a CEO may see it in the press or something like that, though we have methods to inform them immediately when we find a vulnerability. I'll talk about that too. So on our security advisory page, we'll list the security CVE numbers, what products are affected, what your remediation strategy is, will pull in links to other sources of information even. Let's say, for example, I'll use the classic Spectre meltdown vulnerability just to say what we did. We cross-linked to Intel's pages that describe that vulnerability, which variants were affecting which products, when the firmware release would be up to fix those products, and basically a blueprint for a customer to follow to make sure their machines are, basically protected against that vulnerability. So if I were a person buying this asset, I would want to know that that free flow of security information exists, that it would be delivered to me in a prompt and timely manner. Any customer can subscribe, of course, to immediate security updates on any of our products, including sub-products, let's call it, like docking stations. You might say, well, wait a minute. I'm really focused on computers. A docking station, how's that going to be a vulnerability? They're almost little computers unto themselves now. So if there's any code updates for them, you would want to be informed of them. And that's true of any peripheral device that we make. In fact, it's to a company's advantage, forgive me, as they bring in computers. I'm sure you've walked through many an office where there's tons of different little third-party peripherals.
Yep.
That also falls under Lenovo's security umbrella, if you would, for reporting and security updates and everything else. So if you're even attaching devices to the machines, you also have to watch out for them. You may be the most secure around, but if you walk through an office and there's 50 different variations of keyboards, well, which one of those may have had some patch of some kind along the way? We're going to tell you, and it's going to be documented, and it's going to be public. And I think all that starts to create a barrier of defenses against an assault, basically, against the company.
You know, what I love about what you just said, I mean, you brought up a very interesting point. Nowadays, when it comes to data breaches, I mean, we hear about it all the time. It's already an accepted scenario. We already know it's not a matter of if, but when. There's going to be a data breach somewhere because we keep adding more devices, more endpoints, more IoT devices onto our networks. So a vulnerability is going to be found somewhere. And I think what's more important is to acknowledge that possibility that, yes, there might be a data breach, but we're not going to hide from you. We're going to be open and share as much information as possible so that we can contain this breach, we can do damage control, inform the people, as well as try to fix the problem as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. Again, no one likes to talk about that stuff, except really you should talk about it, just like you're doing today with the podcast. And those are the questions that if I were a buyer of product, I want to know to defend myself going forward. And then, of course, once that's established that the machines are securely built, that there's a methodology to update them to continue to protect them for the life of the product. Remember, deployment is just one piece of the puzzle. There's probably a minimal amount, minimized, let me say this right, of maybe, let's say, 3 to 4 years of capitalized life a CEO would expect out of a corporate asset that they paid good money for. So the process of security needs to extend for the life of that product, and the information flow needs to extend for the life of that product, maybe even beyond the capitalized life of that product. And we do a good job, I think, of not just pulling the rug out from a customer when the warranty expires, for example. We keep documentation on our products that have gone back at least 25 years between the combined amount of IBM and Lenovo material that we have for things we produce for those many decades. I don't think many people have a lot of 25-year-old computers lying around, but still, you want to have that long history of good documentation if you're going to be, quite frankly, a regular customer. And that's to your advantage to have that good documentation for the life of the product and beyond.
And, you know, I love also what you talk about product life cycle, because I think that's a really critical point there. You know, one of the things that keep me up at night as a person who's very active in the cybersecurity industry is the fact that no matter how secure your technology is today, I mean, even if it's a veritable Fort Knox that's impervious to any and all attacks known to man, you and I both know that in 6 months from now, a new vulnerability will either be discovered or created by technology that's unimaginable even today. You know, you hear these new stats coming out about quantum computing, doing a process that's supposed to take 200 years in like 100 seconds.
Yeah.
So, you know, there is new technology that's being released constantly. And, I'm sure that CISOs around the world are also concerned about that. How can we ever be secure from threats that don't even exist yet?
You're never, I'd love for you to sit here and say, well, of course, our machines, the Lenovo machines, are invulnerable to everything, right? No,
Everything's
there's
vulnerable.
nothing like that. I would also say that when you look at an asset and you look at updates, we've talked about that a lot because that is a primary approach to defense against vulnerabilities. I think our guys do a great job of staying on it, okay? Because I've had some customers come to me in the past and they say, well, I looked at product X over there, and product X seems to have fewer updates over the last year than yours do. And I say, that's not a sign that they're more secure.
Just the opposite.
Yeah, in fact, that could mean that engineering talent from company X was pulled off on other products, and they're not looking at that thing you bought anymore. If you're seeing updates over time, that means people are paying attention, right? In fact, the lack of it does not mean that that device is perfectly secure. It probably means that it's being ignored. And when it comes to our Think level products, the ThinkPad brand is very well known. Our guys are on it. They're on it for the long haul because people use our assets, or their assets, actually, I should say, once they buy them from us, for a really long time. And we have machines and security updates going back a long time because, as you pointed out, some of these things, like Intel pointed out, were machines that were closing on a decade in life. You always have to be vigilant. You always have to be informed. And the way we approach that, I think, is the best practice that you could possibly get for a CIO or CEO to make sure that they're protected properly.
That's really the key right there. We know that attacks are going to happen. The question is, how frequently are these devices updated, and how available are the updates? So that was a great point right there.
Now, I'll add to that. The next vulnerability, if I were on the other side of the table, is, okay, the machine's secure, as secure as humanly possible, with the attention that it is warranted for the device. Their end users are the next big problem, right? The human factor of, I've turned this secure device over to somebody, but the behavior, how do I kind of adjust that or make them secure when they're out in the field? And we have a couple of things we do to allow a customer to cherry pick from features that engage that. I'll start with the basics, okay? All the Lenovo systems that ship with a built-in camera, we have a physical shutter. The basics of security, a physical shutter that can go over the lens. Now, that doesn't mean that's okay, well, that's not particularly high tech, but I'm sure many people have seen sticky tape and fake shutters put over that because they're afraid that if somebody does manage to somehow use that camera in a malicious manner, they're going to see things that perhaps...
And it's a very real possibility. I mean, it's already happened.
Right. And so instead of a digital disconnect, whereas a piece of plastic that a person will be able to see inside that's part of the device, very unobtrusive, with a red dot, red meaning dead, that the camera is no longer able to see anything, because the end user will see a physical barrier across that camera. Now, a camera could be used, however, as a security enhancer on some of our products. So we do offer Windows Hello certified infrared cameras. They'll do facial recognition at a corporate level. The idea behind that is we don't want somebody holding up an 8x10 of a face and doing biometric login and getting into a machine. Now, how would that benefit, let's say, a chief executive officer of a company if their end users were equipped with that device? Well, the camera can do a few other things. Yes, it can do facial recognition login. The plus to a company on that one is log in, log out is easy, and nobody sees anybody typing a password. We just had a conversation about how there are cameras everywhere, right? Not just in computers, but in phones, over your shoulder, everywhere, right? The less you can have an individual type in a physical password on a keyboard, that means there's a less likelihood that that password will be intercepted. And if you make things easy for an end user, they're more likely to stick with the security policies you want. So if you have facial recognition, for example, we also have fingerprint recognition, both biometrics. That makes login easy, and nobody around you saw a password go by, right? Now, we can take it one step further. I mentioned there's all these cameras. Well, there's also a lot of use of an asset in a public space. We've all gone into, I think, a Starbucks at one point or another, and half the people are there on their computers. And that can be a mobile workforce kind of thing, too. Someone may expect their people to be able to work in a variety of places because they're always on the go. In this case, if you equip a machine with something like an infrared camera, not only will it detect that you're in front of the machine, but it'll see if a second set of eyes is peering over your shoulder. And ARM systems actually can inform you as to which shoulder you're having your screen stared at with a little warning indicator. And then it can proceed to either blur the screen, or if you want, we can also issue machines with a form of privacy glass that attenuates the display so that it blurs out from the side. Both of which gives an end user an opportunity to turn around and look behind them and say, hey, stop looking at my computer. That could also be beneficial if they're in an airport or any other location like that. I should mention also, the machine can also detect, as I mentioned, if you leave the proximity of the system. There's a way to do that with the camera where it immediately locks up the machine until you return. So again, the information that you may have been dealing with on the system is secured at that moment. So those physical elements, I think, go a long way to helping a customer to prevent a leak effectively, a leak they may not even be aware of that can happen with all the end users and the data out there.
What about another issue when it comes to securing devices? So end users like to disable security because it just slows their machine down or hampers productivity. Can you talk to those points?
Yes. Well, obviously, a customer can always layer extra security. We all know that there's a variety of antivirus products. It's a minimum recommendation beyond the usual, although Windows Defender does a great job. There's a variety of products to do that. We offer some of them. We also deal with a company called Absolute. So one of the things you can do is our machines are enabled for their software at a firmware level, meaning you can have an agent go on the system that's not really just in memory. It's got its hooks into the firmware of the system. And that's important to, I think, a customer because they can load all that security extra stuff that we expect a machine to have. But you mentioned what an end user might do, which is what if they start to disable it? You have different skill levels of end users, some of them obviously very technical. They may say, I want this off the machine. So by partnering with that company and making sure in the design of the product, we can have their agent monitor for when someone disables a critical piece of company software, and then reestablish that so that they cannot really disable that unit, that element of software to protect the machine and make sure that it remains secure per company policy and avoid anybody tampering with it. That's not something that can be just turned off because, as I mentioned, that persistence exists in a chip level. That also, by the way, helps if the machine gets lost or stolen. Unfortunately, I find that the reports from companies is a lot of times assets that are lost or stolen, it may be internal theft. This enables them to track that down and maybe shut down something that they have as an internal vulnerability with an employee that's improperly using company assets. They can't turn that off if a customer decides to turn that on, except, of course, for the IT staff that engaged it in the first place.
So, Rob, let's just expand a little bit into what we talked about a moment ago, which is end users disabling security measures. And as we know, many of the more technically savvy users out in the field disable security measures because they claim that they tend to slow computers down, which might actually be true. What are some of the considerations business executives need to have when thinking about selecting their next asset in order to cut down on occurrences of things like this?
Well, I would start by saying, okay, how long are you expecting an end user to have this asset you deploy to them as their productivity machine, right? Is this if it's, I'll give you an example that no one ever follows, but let's just use it as an extreme. 1 year, you're going to give every user in your company a new computer every year. That's very aggressive. I've never seen it before. A more likely scenario is 4 years, 3 years, something like that at a minimum. Some people push it even further than that. So let's start by saying, okay, time frame. You need to know the time frame. In the short time frame, I said before, you can get a machine that does the job today and be pretty much assured that everything's going to be fine. Year plus 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, it's going to be a heavier load for 2 reasons. One is software. I've never seen it get lighter. It always is more feature rich. The operating system gets more feature rich. The security software needs to be more feature rich to defend against evolving threats. So that software load, before you even get to the job that you're issuing the machine to the end user to do is considered, will grow over the time frame that you've established. If it's a longer time frame, consider that when you're deciding the specs that'll do the job. So it's always the job, the mission, plus you're including factors for security, factors for the operating system as a base, and you've got to make sure the spec will support it. The longer the time frame, I hate to say it, it's kind of self-serving. I work for a computer company, but you want the machine to be spec heavy so that you don't run out of gas with the extra load that will creep onto that machine just to do its mission as the years roll by. And then when you get close to the end life of the system, you can refresh and look at the new specs that are needed to accomplish whatever you want at that moment. That may mean you buy a heavier processor, certainly a little more memory. The longer the time frame, I would say consider heavier specs up front, even if they're beyond what you need at that moment.
That is such great advice. I mean, it sounds so simple, but at the end of the day, it's working as designed. You know, your needs will increase, but the physical equipment stays the same.
Yes.
Rob, how do people connect with you?
I work primarily in the Southeast, but I'll put my email address up here. It's rbkirk at lenovo.com for email. That's probably the best way to get in touch with us if you want to talk to me directly. If you also, there's other people like me covering the United States. If you're in a different part of the country that I do not cover, I certainly have a teammate that will be able to reach out and get in contact with you about Lenovo products and services. So that'll probably be the easiest method to do at this point. Of course, there's also our webpage. My favorite, by the way, from a support perspective, if you want to get techie, is pcsupport.lenovo.com. The main page is www.lenovo.com.
Great. And you mentioned earlier that remediation website.
Yes. Probably the easiest way to get to that, if you want to say, okay, I am concerned about security, I want to see the vulnerabilities, there'd be 2 ways to do that. One would be if you just look up, Google's probably the easiest versus me reading off a long URL, Lenovo Product Security Advisory page. You should see, and make sure it's our domain, security first, but you should see basically the long list of every vulnerability we see for our commercial large organization products, and the things I mentioned before, CVE numbers, remediation strategies, all laid out for you. You can subscribe to that via RSS if you wish, if you need proactive notification. And if you set up an account on that pcsupport.lenovo.com page I mentioned, you can subscribe to individual products and be told, hey, listen, I'm buying ThinkPad P1 systems from you guys. I want to know if something hits. There's a way to check a box and say if a critical update hits, you are to email me daily, weekly, monthly, whatever you want to set the frequency as. And we will tell you immediately and point back to that article that would be on the security advisory page. So you'll be very rapidly informed of any vulnerability or critical update regarding any of our products if you take that simple step. That also would inform you if there was a driver update or any other code update related to that system on the schedule that your end user wants.
Great. And you brought up a very good point about a lot of clever fakes being out there in the search results. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to post a link to the authentic site on the show notes so people can just look that up, click on it, and get right to it.
Yeah, as long as it ends with, make sure it's got Lenovo.com in the primary domain so you know it's ours and not a third party. I don't expect that to be the case. I checked that search before we got on this one, and it should show you the security advisory page. But
give it 2
podcast,
weeks.
You never know what kind of poisoning may occur. So if someone hears this and says, aha, I'll figure out a way to tamper with search results, I don't want that to happen. So always be safe.
Yeah, great advice. And last but not least, where can people go to learn more about the Thinkshield product line?
Certainly. We actually have a dedicated page. It also has a rep contact page. bit.ly/Thinkshield is a shortened URL you can use to get to the Lenovo Thinkshield page. Or you alternatively can use Google and make sure you use the term Thinkshield and Lenovo, and then it goes to a Lenovo.com domain. So that's a good branch point for a lot of this that we've discussed. For more specific security advisory information, I would encourage you to use the terms Lenovo Security Advisory page. Make sure it's our domain, and you should see a listing of Lenovo security updates and CVE numbers that you can drill down into for specific products.
Great. Rob, do you have any parting words of wisdom that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, I'd say one common thing I see in IT shops is they have the mantra of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That is the wrong philosophy to have when it comes to security. If it ain't broke, don't fix it will get you into trouble. In this case, constant updates and constant vigilance is the appropriate way to approach this stuff, even if that means a little extra work and a little extra pain. If your IT staff is of the mindset of, well, it's working fine, we shouldn't have to do anything with it, you're going to get burned and you're going to get hit by something. And you don't want to fall into the trap of seeing your company listed in some newspaper article because your people weren't proactive about doing the basics of updating that we've discussed on this podcast.
Great. Rob, thank you so much for sharing your time and your wisdom. I really enjoyed having you on the show.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity, and I hope that anyone listening to it has at least gotten a couple of useful bits of information.